Okay, Bez Hashem, we're starting another shir in Sefer Yeshua, Parak Aleph, Pasuk Hey. The Pasuk says, Yityetzeb ish לפניך. Nobody should stand in front of you to disturb the ongoing process of coming into Eretz Yisrael, Kol Yemei Chayecha, all the days of your life. Kasher hayisi Aeye. The same way I was with Moshe Rabbeinu, I'll be with you. Aarpech A'azvek, I will not leave you alone, and I will not forsake you. The basic of what's going on over here is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving Yeshua Avtacha that he need not worry about anybody who's going to stand up against him, whether from within the Machana, whether from outside the Machana, and he'll have Hatzlacha, and all the days of his life, meaning that the concept of Yeshua's entire life was revolving around the fact that he was bringing Klal Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael, and the same way HaKadosh Baruch Hu was with Moshe, I'll be with you, I'll be with Yeshua, and I will not leave you go. So the first thing is, will be aimed on the Lashon HaPasuk, Yityetzeb ish לפניך. The Pasuk means, Yityetzeb, the Bnei Yissaschar tells to the Pasuk, or before that he says, that if the Pasuk would say, Yakum ish לפניך, no one will stand up to you, it would mean that, like the Pasuk says, over there the pasuk says that so the lashon of kima would mean a derech kavod, and a derech kavod and hider. But Yityetzeb is derech azus ugvura. He says a derech of chutzpah, and trying to derech azus ugvura is his lashon, like we find in the pasuk by Dasan and Aviram that in Sefer Bamidbar, Dasan va'avirim yotzu nitzavim, and Rashi says over there was bekoima skufa. They were standing tall and proud, lecharev ulegadev, to speak out and to curse out Moshe Rabbeinu. K'mer ve'yityasev arboim yom de Goliath, by Goliath, when he was standing up, when he was being mecharev from Megadev to Maroches of Elikim, as the pasuk says by David HaMelech, it also uses a lashon of Yityetzeb. So Yityetzeb is a lashon of standing with a starkheit, to be misnaged to a specific inyan. See, he says, "Ve'al teshiveni," and don't ask me pasuk atem nitzavim ayom kolchem. There he also uses a lashon of nitzavim, but the Zachas, he explains that it's a davar pashut, that over there nitzavim means that there's a certain gvura that the Klal Yisrael needed to stand up against the Yetzer Hara, and that's what the kaimas kufa that Klal Yisrael needed. And it's quite interesting because the Medrash says over there that the Klal Yisrael was very nervous, so to speak, when they heard all the 99 klalas from Moshe Rabbeinu. So they said, what's going to be with us? There's so much that we have to do, and there's so much that we're going to be responsible for, and it's going to be very schwer. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu to be mechazik them, to say that to give them that kaima skufa, to be able to be mechazik and not have the chalisha sadas, and to go weiter. The Mefarshim speak out over here that there's four basic ideas that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was being mavtiach Yeshua, that he doesn't need to be afraid of when he's being machnas Klal Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael, and he's starting the Milchama against the Ummas that live there and the 31 kings, as we'll soon see. The first one is that anybody who gets into a position of power is always has to be a little bit afraid that somebody from within his close machna is gonna rebel against him, to rat him out. And like we find by Moshe Rabbeinu, that Korach got up against him, and there were others in Klal Yisrael that tried to stand up against Moshe Rabbeinu. And we mentioned Dasan and Aviram before, but Shtein Chazal, that they wanted that these rebel rousers wanted to replace Moshe Rabbeinu with Dasan and Aviram b'Makam Aaron, Chas v'Shalom, to do such a thing. But this is what they wanted, and for this, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was maftiach him and says, Yityetzeb ish לפניך kol yemei chayecha, all the days of your life, nobody will stand up against you like that. The Malbim explains that there's not going to be anybody from Klal Yisrael that's going to stand up against him, but there's a Sifri in Parshas Eikev that's mashma, that it's going on the people that lived in Eretz Canaan also, as we'll soon see. Fine, that's number one. Number two, Yeshua didn't have to be afraid. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was being maftiach Yeshua that he didn't have to be afraid that another Navi is going to stand up from within Klal Yisrael to be the manik, to try to take him over. Ella, Kasher, Aeye, just like I was with, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, just like I was with Moshe Rabbeinu, I'll be with you. Ma Moshe haya yochid b'doiroi, kach ata tia yochid b'dorcha. The same way when Moshe was the leader of Klal Yisrael, he was the only leader. So too you will be the only leader. It's interesting because Aaron was almost like a sidekick, but that's a separate shmuz. But what's interesting is that it says by Moshe Rabbeinu, "V'loikam navi oid bi Yisrael k'Moshe." There was no navi like Moshe, not before him and not after him. But when Yeshua is alive, there's not going to be any navi that's going to stand up, that's going to be as great as Yeshua. But maybe after the P'tir of Yeshua, there are going to be other Nevi'im, there are going to be many Nevi'im, as I state in the Mefarshim. But what's very interesting is that if you look in the Meshech Chochmah at the beginning of Parsha Shmais, where Yishtal Zavek, a lot of big Yesodis about the Madregas and Nevuah of Moshe and the other Nevi'im. So he says that Yeshua was on the Madrega of Nevuah, Ad Kedei Siluk HaBechira, to the point we had no more Bechira, just like it was by Moshe Rabbeinu. Meaning it's not necessarily that the Darg of Nevuah was as great as, the Nevuah itself wasn't necessarily as great as Moshe Rabbeinu, but the fact that he had no more Bechira, because he was so Meshubah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, mitaych the Shibud of the Nevuah, so to speak. So that's how he was like Moshe Rabbeinu. It's interesting because all the Mefarshim bring here, the Megala Amukah says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Mitzvah Moshe to be Megala to Yeshua, the Nun Shari Bina. And that's why he's called Yeshua ben Nun, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him the Nun Shari Bina to be Mekayim, L'kayim Asher Nemar, Kasher, Hayisi, Moshe, Aઈએ. So, number one, there's not going to be anybody from within the Machna that's going to stand up against him. Number two, Yeshua didn't have to be afraid that anybody was going to be a Manig or a Navi like him. Number three, Yeshua was afraid that there were 31 kings that were very strong and very powerful, and they knew how to fight. Who says that Klal Yisrael did fight, but it could be these people are trained warriors and fighters for who knows how many years. And what is Klal Yisrael? They're coming, they're sitting and learning all day with Moshe Rabbeinu and now Yeshua. So what chances do they have to stand up against these kings? So that's why Kadosh Baruch Hu was maftiachim kasher yisi Moshe Aeye imach. The same way that Moshe Rabbeinu stood in front of Parai and spoke to him very forcefully and strong that he must let Klal Yisrael leave Mitzrayim. And I told him, Kadosh Baruch Hu says, and I told Moshe that I'll be with you, and you don't have to be afraid of Parai. Parai was a very scary person. It's Mavur and Chazal in Parashat Shmos that when Moshe and Aaron came to talk to Parai, especially the first time, it was very intimidating. There were lions, and there was a lot of kishuf, and there was a lot of tumah. There wasn't a place for a nice Jewish boy. Even though it's interesting, because Moshe Rabbeinu Be'etzim grew up in Mitzrayim and grew up in Parai's palace, but he came in there. All the Kaychas HaTumah were machnia themselves to Moshe Rabbeinu. So what HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling Yeshua is that you don't have to be afraid of any of these kings that you're going to end up fighting with. And we find by Moshe Rabbeinu that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him, Eyyeh Asher Eyyeh, which is, referencing one of the Shemus HaKdeshim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But what's the double lashon Asher Eyyeh? The first one, the Eke is going on Moshe Rabbeinu. And the second one is Kasher Hoya in Moshe Eyyeh Imach. That just like Moshe Rabbeinu was able to subdue and get rid of the Malchei, get rid of Mitzrayim and get rid of all the other people that stood up against him, so too Yeshua will be able to be Machniah and be Menatzeach the 31 kings and anybody else that stands up against Moshe Rabbeinu. Number 4 is that Yeshua doesn't have to be afraid of the Yetzer Hara. Because we know from Chazal, the Gemara says, and what does this mean? L'chara, what does this mean? L'chara, this means like this, that eventually what ends up happening is when a person's at war for so long, he doesn't have any, he gets too shvach, isn't interested anymore, gets burnt out, doesn't have kayach, he sees so much, it's not good for him. And maybe he'll say that, it's not right for me to be the leader of Klal Yisrael, maybe I should give it over to somebody else. Zak the pasuk, Yityetzeb ish לפניך, kol yemei chayecha, כאשר הייתי Moshe אהיה ארפך אעזבך, that there's not going to be any mokum for chalisha sadas, or some kind of fake humility. A lot of times people have, like, they're dropped too humble and they don't stand, they're humble in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they should be standing up for Kvod Shamayim, they should be standing up for Klal Yisrael and for other things, but they don't. The Lamaisa leads to terrible things when this happens. But the pasuk is being maftiach Yeshua that he'll always have this, his chaskus and this gvura and this midas hanitzachon, so to speak, connected the Yetzer Hara. Now, what's interesting is that there's a parsha later on in Sefer Yeshua where a malach came to mon him that he wasn't learning enough, and that he was being shvach in certain mitzvahs. Fine, but that's a separate shmuz and mitzvah. Shem will get there. Another just interesting nekuda is that the Rambam says in Hilchos Malachim Parak Aleph that after they do Mashiach to a king, so in order to appoint a king, he gets Mashiach, with Shem and Mishcha, and he's Zeicha to be the king, and all his children outside Kaladaris. And the taich in this is that with this Mashiach, this gives him the ability to be Mamshech, the Melucha, for him and for his children, and he has this Kedushas HaMelucha, so to speak, and Mela, his children, are going to be kings also. Just interesting that by Yeshua, the Rambam says first that he had a din of a melech, and he was nismana, he was appointed by Moshe Rabbeinu, as they state in Pesukim, but it doesn't say that he had any kind of Mashiach. So l'chayra, we could say that there's a big chiluk between the Malchus of Moshe and Yeshua, that they were appointed themselves to be the king, without the Mashiach of Malchus, that their children should be mamshechid, like the Gemara says in Zvachim and Dafkuf Beis, that Moshe was zeicha in Malchus, but loy zachal lezara. He wasn't zeicha that his children should be malachim also. And similarly, we find by Yeshua, that's kasher hayisi of Moshe, Aeye, that it's a Malchus, but the buck stops there. Their children weren't zeicha. We'll see that Yeshua only had daughters; he didn't have sons. So that's a separate shmuz also. But what's interesting is that by Shaul and David, these were the kings, as I state in Gemara, these were the kings that were Nimshach, B'Shem and Amishcha. Their children and their descendants became kings afterwards. Now, Shaul had issues. He lost the Melucha for various reasons on his own, but that's the L'chayra, this Shtukal Marum is in the Pasuk also, that the type of Malchus that Moshe had, Yeshua also had, meaning that it's not going to be something that's going to be passed down to the children. The question is why, which I'm not going to discuss now. Okay, fine. Now, we mentioned before a Sifri in Parshas Eikev that says that Yityetzeb in Parshas Eikev says Yityetzeb b'fneichem. It's not exactly the same nusach as the pasuk over here, but the Sifri Darshan is ainly ela ish. How do we know? So the pasuk only says ish. Uma ay mishpacha isha b'kshafeha minayin. How do you know a nation or a family or a woman with her kshafim won't be able to stand up against Klal Yisrael, or for our purposes, Yeshua ben Nun either? Talmud loymer le'yityativ ish b'fneichem. Nobody at all will be able to stand up against you. Le'yityativ mikol mokem. Nobody at all will be able to stand up against you. Im kein lama nemar ish. Why does the pasuk have to say ish? Afilu ka'og melech habashan. Even somebody as powerful and as strong as Og melech habashan. Charid is makom to be medayik in the lashon hasafri. L'chayr, we should say the Ummah should come afterwards. We should say Ainli Ella Ish Mishpacha Ay Ummah Isha B'Kshafeha Minayin. Why is it the other way around? Why is it Ummah and then Mishpacha? So the Chasdei David on the Sifri explains that the Mishpacha that we're talking about over here is Amalek. Now we know that Amalek does whatever it can to destroy the Kedushas Sabayis and to destroy the Kedushas HaMishpacha, but that's why we're referring to Amalek. The Chasdei David says that it's referring to Amalek over here, and Mirz Hashem in a little bit. In a couple of minutes, we'll discuss the specific role that Amalek had over here. Now, what do we mean when the Sifri says, Isha b'kshafeha? And what's interesting is that when the Torah says not to do kishuf, the Torah says, Mechashefa lo'isechaya alashan nekeva. Not, it's usher to do kishuf, but any mechashefa you should not leave alive. So there's a lot of rate over here on this pasuk befrat. We're saying in Chazal that it was more common for the women to be involved in kishuf. Pirkei Avos mentions this, that mar b'shvachim, mar b'kshafim, things like that. But the concept is that the kayach that a woman has is much in when she does kishuf, it's much stronger than when a man does it. Just two inyanim to mention that Yeshua had to deal with kishuf, and as we mentioned in previous yurim, that all the Zaynumis, the Avodah Zarah that they were doing was with tremendous kayches hatumah, with tremendous kishuf, and as we'll see now a little bit about what this milchama was really about. in Pirkei Reb Eliezer and Perek Nun Beis, it goes through different mifsim, different gavaldige zachen, great things that happened for the first time, when it happened, how it happened, and the story behind it, so to speak. So Teich Dvar over there in Perek Nun Beis says like this: Mifis Shishi, the sixth thing that's the Mifis, that was the first time in world history that such a thing like this ever happened. From the time the world was created, the moon and the stars and the mazalos, they have their cycles of when they bring light onto the world. And they don't bother each other, and they don't, they don't fight with each other. They don't make any issues with each other. Until Yeshua came and was making a Milchama for Klal Yisrael against the Umas in Eretz Yisrael. Now we mentioned this previously, and we're going to talk about it again when we discuss this in later on in Sefer Yeshua. But I'll go upon just to mention this idea over here. The Erev Shabbos Hoya, and it was Erev Shabbos. The question is, what does Erev Shabbos got to do with this? Yeshua b'tzaraso shel Yisrael shleichalo was a Shabbos, and Yeshua saw the pain of Klal Yisrael that they didn't want to be Mechal Shabbos, even though l'chayra was b'kuach nefesh to fight this war and it was a Melchemes mitzvah. Yeshua saw. I think that the Pasha teaches, we could say without getting involved in anything fancy here, or just the Davar Pasha, that Yeshua saw that they were pained that they had to fight on Shabbos. Not that there was anything wrong with fighting on Shabbos. It's absolutely 100% mutter to fight on Shabbos, but they would have rather have kept Shabbos properly without having to deal with this war. V'oid sharach hartumim ha'amorim kaivshin b'mazalis ba'an al Yisrael. He saw the Chartumim, the Mechashvim, that they started from Amori, right? So the Gemara always uses the lashon of Darkei Amori because they were the chief Mechashvim, and they were the chief people involved in these suspicious types of behaviors. So Kaivshim Mazalis, they were starting to squelch the Mazalis, as we'll see in a minute what that means. Al Yisrael, Ba'am Al Yisrael, they started to attack Klal Yisrael. Ma'os Yeshua, what did Yeshua do? Pashat Yadai L'Or HaShemesh, he outstretched his hand into the light of the sun, L'Or HaYereach L'Or HaKechavim, V'Hizkir Aleim Es Hashem, he stretched his hand up to the sun and the moon and to the stars, and he mentioned the Shem Kodesh of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, V'Amdu Kol Echad V'Echad, the sun, the moon, and all the stars and all the mazalas stopped their cycles, stopped moving, stopped their travels, stopped whatever they were doing, and they were Oimid Kol Echad V'Echad Lamed Vav Shois for 36 hours Ad Motzei Shabbos. Obviously, Shabbos is generally 24 hours, but this was even more because they were fighting the war from even before that. Shenemar Vayidam Hashemesh V'Yareach Omad Ad Yokum Goy Oivav, that the Shemesh and the Yareach stopped until Klal Yisrael was able to fight off the enemies. And the pasuk says, "Uksiv v'leihoyer kayom mahul lefanav ha'achar v'lishmaya Hashem v'shom." And the pasuk says that there was no other day like this beforehand or afterwards that all the kechavim and the mazalai stopped. Now we know that the Gemara says that there were 3 people that the sun stopped for them, but the zach is that when over there, even by Moshe, by Milchemes Amalek, which we mentioned before, that we're going to talk about Milchemes Amalek, we can get back into it now, that by Milchemes Amalek, Moshe stopped the sun. It says that Moshe stopped the sun, but the fact that Yeshua stopped all the kechavim, all the mazalas, and everything for this long period of time, nobody else in the history of humanity did that. As I was saying, the mention over here, even if Eliyahu, the Gemara of Zar talks that Eliyahu also did it by Har Carmel, it wasn't as great as this that was done by Yeshua at this point. V'shamu Malchei Eretz, and all the kings of the land heard v'tamo, and they were in shock. Shleihayu kamoyu miyem shenivra ha'olam shenemar leihayu kayoim hahu. And all the kings of the land were in shock. They were all terrified because they never saw such a thing before. From when the world was created until that day, like the pasuk says, leihayu kayoim hahu. Now, what does it mean that we said that there were kavshim b'mazalos? So we know from the Gemara and the Darim and elsewhere that the reason why they're called mechashvim is because they're machish pamalya shamala. They use the keiches hatoma, they use the keiches haram of the world to be machish, to weaken the pamalya shamala. What does that mean? HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives the echelos for these people to get in their way. It's part of having bechira in the world. And what they would do is they would communicate with the malachim in charge of these entities, and they would use them for what they wanted to. And when Yeshua was Maimed the Chama and the Mazalos, when Yeshua stopped the cycle of the sun and the moon and all the Mazalos with this Shem Kodesh, that was able to be mevatel all the kshafim that the Mazalos, that these Mechashrim were trying to do to try to stop these Klal Yisrael from coming into Eretz Yisrael. And really, that was the point over here, that Yeshua, so yitייצב איש לפניך means that these people that tried to stop, it says that the Malachim were, the kings were in shock. Why were the kings in shock? Because these were people that nobody was ever able to stand up against them. And now we have it that Yeshua ben Nun goes and he says a Shem Kodesh and he's mevatel the whole Inyan. He's not just mevatel the whole Inyan of the Kishuf. He stops the Chama and Levana. He's in charge of all of that now, and once he's in charge of that, so all the kishuf is gone. He's mevatel all the kishuf. Fine. Now let's see, because this is also kasher Aa'zbech. This idea is also a concept that we find by Moshe Rabbeinu as well, because it says by Melchemes Amalek with Moshe Rabbeinu within the Parshas Beshalach, Bechar lanu anoshim. Zogt Rashi, what does it mean Bechar lanu anoshim? Go choose for us people for the war. Go choose people that know how to be mevatel kshafim, because the Bnei Amalek, the people of Amalek, were big mechashvim. It's interesting because we know from the Gemara Sanhedrin, we're not going to get into this now, we discussed this in the Shira Manchelik, that the pasuk of Ata Hareis Aladas Ki Hashem Hu Elokim Einad Milvadai is the antidote to be mevatel kshafim, as the Gemara says in Chulin and the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Daf Samach Zayin. And the pasuk continues over there at the end of Parshas Beshalach, Vayehi Yodav Amuna Ad Boi Hashemesh, and his hands were with a starkheit until the sun sets. Rashi says, Shahayu Amalekim Echashvin Es Hashois B'Tzrologia, the Amalekim had cheshbainis of the hours with the sun, with their astrologies and their chachmas. Be'ezeh shah him neitzchim, of what hour they'll have the koyach to be menatzeach. Be'hemed lehem Moshe chama, Moshe stopped the sun ve'irva v'sashois, and he confused the hours. So Moshe confused the hours and confused Amalek, and Amalek wasn't able to be menatzeach, and Klal Yisrael was able to win this war against Amalek. Now, the Balaturim says on the pasuk Mechashefa Leisechaya, he says that there's Gimel b'Mesorah. There's 3 times in Tanakh where we have the word Sechaya. Leisechaya kol neshama, v'achachma tichya techaya baleha. Meaning this one over here, Mechashefa Leisechaya kol neshama, v'achachma techaya baleha. So the Balaturim brings the Medrash Yesh. It's a Medrash. The Amalekim were mechashron, like we just mentioned from Rashi, and the Parshas Beshalach. V'asu atzmam kedmus behemis, and they were able through Kishuv to turn themselves into animals. Lihimalek atzmam, to be able to escape from this war. So if they're only going to kill the people, you don't have to kill the animals. So then they'll be able to run away. They'll turn themselves into a donkey and run away. Lekach tziva Kadosh Baruch Hu v'hemicha Me'ish ad Isha. Therefore, Kadosh Baruch Hu is mitzavin the Melchemes Amalek to destroy and completely wipe out Me'ish ad Isha, all men and women, Me'oil vadyanik, even the little young children, Mishor v'atzeh, from the cows into the sheep. Why? V'zehu, why do you have to kill the sheep also? What do they do wrong? Because he says, they had a gewisse chachma, and the chachma is a kishuf, and they wanted to be mechaya themselves with this chachma. That's why the pasuk says, "Leisechaya kol neshama mechashefa leisechaya." They shouldn't even allow. Meaning, this is a chachma that will give them the chance to live. If we kill out all the animals, then we're going to be getting rid of this type of kishuf as well. And we have this. And where's this chazal? So, the Baal Turim brings it from the Medrash, but Rashi and Sefer Shmuel with the Melchemes Amalek with Shaul and Agog, it says, "Shayu mishanim atzmam b'kshafim liyazdem labehema." And the Mamela, they were able to turn themselves into an animal. And the Gemara talks about Maiselach like this also, that they were, he went to the local enterprise to rent a donkey, and then the donkey turned out to be one of these mechashvim. That may make sense to, this is what was going on with Bilam and his donkey, but Al Kapanim, just another another two ha'aros over here, that the Vayachalosh Yeshua, back to Melchemes HaMolech over here, it says that the Vayachalosh Yeshua, so the Tur, in his Pirush on Chumash, says, Yesh Mefarshim Shabalik Shafim Hayu, again, there were Balik Shafim, Ubachul Hamanashim La Melchama, and the Amalekim chose people to fight this war. They would make it impossible for them to get killed because of the kishuf that they knew. They knew some kind of kishuf that would prevent them from getting killed. So Rashi says in Sanhedrin, where the Gemara says that a Sanhedrin has to have Balik Shafim. So Rashi explains, because in order to kill a Mechashvim, you have to know kishuf to overpower the kishuf. Why? Because this is the Lashon Rashi. I'll just read it. Lahamis mechashrum habaytchem bekishveyam. They're going to be bayterch in their kishuf linatzal midei bezin. Bezin is going to try to kill them. They're going to be able to overpower them with the kishuf. So that's a pshat in yiteyצב ish לפניך, that nobody's going to be able to stand up against you. Lo ish v'lo isha afilu koig melech habashan. And what's interesting, why koig melech habashan? So I think that if I'm correct, I don't know, but it says that Og picked up a huge mountain, and when he picked up the mountain, it blacked out the sun. So it blacked out the sun, so that was getting them nervous. But that's weiter with this concept of being ma'arv of the shois, being ma'amid the chama, to be mevatel the kishuv. Og, we know, was a very stark mechashav as well, and Moshe was afraid of him because he had chusim from Avram Avinu, because he helped out Avram. But al kapanim, even a zamin person who has chusim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling Yeshua, they don't have to be afraid. Okay. Besides for that, there's another story which is fascinating. That's brought in the Yalkut Ruveni at the end of Parshas Tvarim, and it's also brought at the end of Sefer Yuchsin. And I'll just go through the story to share it with the Olam. It says like this. There was from these 31 kings that heard that Yeshua is coming to fight them. So Shaivach was the king of Paras Hamada at the time. So he sent a letter to Yeshua ben Nun after he fought with the 31 kings that he's coming with another 45 kings to make a Melchama Keneged Yisrael. And what was their tzad to, if Yeshua did a pretty good job with these 31 fellows. So, but now you have a king, he says he's coming with 45 armies to fight Klal Yisrael. It's pretty terrifying. The mother of this king Shaivach was a tremendous machshefa in the literal sense and in the figurative sense. And they wanted to do kshafim keneged Klal Yisrael. And Yeshua was takach reishish for kshafim. And until Pinchas, we know him, who was the kanoi who stood up against Zimri, was able to be pile keneged the kishuf. And this is the pshat in the pasuk of Yiteyצב ish לפניך, meaning even the isha won't be matzleich with rikshafim to stand up against us. What was the story? So Yeshua had 12,000 foot soldiers, and they were marching along to fight the war. And Shaivach, this king, saw the order of the army, and he was wondering, what's this army all about? What are they worth? What could they do? So his mother was big mechshefa, and she told him, don't be afraid of them, because I'm just going to read the Lashon. Ani azgireim b'teich shiva choymei shel barzel val yedu mekaymam ayom. I'm going to be able to, with my kishuf, lock them within 7 walls of iron, and no one's going to know where they are, and they're not going to be able to do anything to you. Meaning, you think that they're so powerful, they're not going to be able to do anything to you. But she did her kishuf, kishufeha, v'tazgireim teich zayin chaimis. And it seems like she was pretty matzliach, that she was able to trap them with her kishuf in these, that she created with her kishuf, these 7 walls of kishuf, of barzel. Ukir'ois Yeshua zeh, and when Yeshua saw this, obviously he was trapped. Tza'ak liboy el Hashem, he cried out to Hashem. V'yisyayitz benav sheveyichtav ksav liyoniach b'mishpachas Ruvain. So he cried out to Hashem, and he had an idea, he had a chap, that he's going to write a letter to Yoniach, who was in charge of Mishpachas Ruvain, and that was in charge of the 2.5 Shvatim that were on the Evar Yarden. The Lashon over here is that he was the Melech al Shnei Shvatim v'chatzi Hashem Evar Yarden, that he should come with his army, and he should bring Pinchas, who was a Kayin now, with the Chatzeches Hatrua B'Yodak. And Vatavel Yeshua Yoina Achas Leis Erev, and a dove flew to Yeshua in the evening, and Yeshua wrote this letter on its tied it to the dove, and he sent this to Yoniach. And the dove flew to Yoniach, and he took the letter and he reads it. And it says, Vayakam al Amda Vayitzak Taka Gedola Vayirkav al Susai. He got very excited about this, and he gave a geshrai, and he got onto his horse. V'yachris b'chol machanei v'cherev l'Hashem. And he made announcements in all the machanes that we have to fight the Milchemes Hashem, cherev l'Hashem, and he gathered a big chever together. Vayishlach v'yikras Pinchas v'yelchu shneim. And he called out to Pinchas, and the two went off to the Yoniach, and Pinchas went together. Ukarois imay shel Shebach achel hazeh. When the mother of Shebach saw this great army, Amr lebnavi isi kaychav olam mimizrach ve'en chachma ve'en eitza b'chachmasi. Kina vaynaisi la'atar kayach kenegdai. So she says to her son, I see a great star that's coming up in the east, and I can't do anything about it. I'm completely done, overpowered. I don't have any kayach keneged this. En chachma ve'en eitza b'chachmasi. My chachma is gone. Kina vaynaisi la'atar kayach kenegdai. I don't have the ability to stand up against him. He got very upset at his mother because this was his Eitzah had to knock out Yeshua's army. And he killed his own mother. And Yoniach came to Yeshua's assistance, and they waged a war against Shevach, and they killed him. Pinchas came and blew the Chatzaitos. With each trua that he blew 7 truas. With each one of these truas, another one of these chaimis barzel of the kishuf fell down. And they went out and they killed all the enemies that they needed to kill until there was nobody left over from this machane. They were gone. So this is another story where we're seeing leisatziv ish, whether it's ish, whether it's isha. Here, this isha had a tremendous kayach hakishuf to be misnaget to. Specifically Yeshua. It's just interesting that they made 7 Chaimis Barzel. We'll see later with the story of Rachav at the beginning of Parak Beis that also Vaita with the Kayach HaKishuv of a woman specifically, and also the Kayach of 7 times, that they had to go around the wall 7 times and they had to blow the Trua 7 times in order to collapse the wall of Yericha, which is also very much this Kayach HaKishuv and this Kayach HaSatuma, maybe even to use the word Klipis, to be able to try to disturb Klal Yisrael from allowing Klal Yisrael to do this, from allowing Klal Yisrael to come into Eretz Yisrael, but with the Chatzaitos and the Havtacha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the Tfilas of Yeshua, to be able to get rid of them, and they were able to kill off all these enemies until there was nobody left over from them. Okay. Fine. It's just interesting. It's just more of a side note. Not a side note, it's another ha'ara that it says, לפניך, nobody should be able to stand up against you, that the kishuf wouldn't work. Keneged Yeshua, we saw 2 times the Mechashon tried Keneged Yeshua, and both times the kishuf was subdued with the Kedusha of Yeshua and the Avtacha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So how could it be that we find at the end of Sefer Shmuel Aleph that Shaul goes to the Balas Oiv and calls up Shmuel Hanavi with the Oiv? L'chayra Shmuel Hanavi is Moshe v'Aaron b'Chayanav v'Shmuel b'Karei Shmuel. L'chayra Shmuel Hanavi is from the greatest Nevi'im that ever lived. So how could it be that the Balas Oiv had Epis HaKoyach over here? So the Malbim is Masber over there, how this would, in Perach of Ches and Sefer Shmuel, how it would work. That's the different parts of the neshama, and there's different parts of the neshama itself goes up to Shemayim right away, but then there's the koyach ha'hiyuli that drezach by the guf in the kever, and that's what the balas oiv is. That's what the oiv is targeting, and with that's how you could be malad oiv. I don't know exactly how this works, but the pshat is that the so when the pasuk, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Yeshua ben Nun, Le'yisatziv ish lefanecha kol yemei chayecha, meaning because there's the kayach ha'hiyuli, the Malbim explains that this kayach ha'hiyuli stays in the kever by the guf of a person even after he's nifter for 12 months. So the best time to be mal of the person with oiv is within 12 months of the ptira. So when the pasuk says "Yitייצב ish לפניך kol yemei chayecha," it's coming to be marbe even this tkufa, of after the person's nifted, the neshama is not here anymore, but this koyach hiyuli v'streisach by the guf. So the balas oiv wouldn't be able to tap into that to be able to be mala the balas oiv. The kshafim of the balas oiv won't be able to work over there either. All right. There's another interesting zach about Kol Yemei Chayecha. We know the Gemara in Brachas says, and Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis, we say it in the Godah Shel Pesach, it says, Yemei Chayecha Hayamim, Kol Yemei Chayecha HaLeilos. Meaning that the Yemei, if the pasuk would just say Yemei Chayecha, it would mean that you would have to say Kriya Shema by day. When it says Kol Yemei Chayecha, Kol is coming to be marba even at night. The Chachamim say, Yemei Chayecha Olam Hazeh. The Chachamim say that when the pasuk says Yemei Chayecha means in this world, and Kol Yemei Chayecha is to Lahavi L'Mois HaMashiach. That even L'Mois HaMashiach, it should, you'll still have to say Kriya Shema. And it's Mavur. There's a story that they say from the Goin, that the Goin was, the Vilna Goin was one time in the middle of his Seder, and he got to this part, and he said, Zalbazach is by the Nachash. So they asked him what he meant, and he says, because by the Nachash it says, Va'afar Teichal Kol Yemei Chayecha. It says you'll eat dust, you'll eat dirt all the days of your life. The Hainu, that even when everybody else gets a tikkun l'ased lavoi, the Nachash will not get a tikkun. Now really it's Mavur, that the tikkun of the Nachash, the tikkun of Amalek, is going to be Achirsei Adei Oived. The fact that he's going to be non-existent, that's going to be the ultimate tikkun. It's not going to be so much the tikkun for him, it's as much as it's going to be the tikkun for us. It's just interesting that this is Mavur in Midrashim, it's mentioned in Chumah, it's mentioned in a bunch of places, that even L'ased Laved is not going to be a tikkun for the Nachash. It's very interesting that the Svar Makdashim talk over here, talking about the different kaychas atoma, the different klippas, and the different zachin that we're in Eretz Yisrael, that we're lurking around Eretz Yisrael, while Klal Yisrael is trying to come in there. The Lamed Aleph Malachim and the Zayin Umis, they were all very, very much connected to the Nachash. So the job of Yeshua, Benun, to come into Eretz Yisrael is to be mevatel the kayach of this Nachash. The Nun is connected to the Nachash. But that's not so much al pi pshat. But the Bnei Sasker in Derech Ezeisecha, in his Sefer on Yeshua, he says that Kol Yemei Chayecha is coming to be marba even the days that is Canaan, that after Yeshua was nifter. After Yeshua was nifter, then Elazar HaKohen took over for a while, and they were called as Canaan until the Tkuf of the Shoftim. Now we're going to talk about this in a little bit also, but the pasuk says that the Canaan Asher Harichu Yam Macharav. Because Kol Zman a person's Talmidim are still alive, it's Ki'ilu, he's alive also. So it's weiter called Yemei Chayecha. So what's Kol Yemei Chayecha? Kol Yemei Chayecha is even the Tkufa, after a person leaves this world, there's Talmidim are still alive. But now, the Zach is, what ended up happening was, we'll see that the Psukim later on, at the end of Sefer Yeshua, say that after these Canaan were nifter, Klal Yisrael started doing Averis. And once Klal Yisrael started doing Averis, Sren the Goyim that lived next to them, that were surrounding them, started causing problems for them, and they weren't able to fight. They didn't have the Koyach HaNitzachon of Yeshua anymore. And the reason is because they were chayte. Kolzman Yeshua was alive. They were afraid. They weren't able to be chayte. They were able to fight against Yitzhahara. Once Yeshua is not here anymore, they don't have the protection of the Yitייצב ish לפניך, that ish being the Yitzhahara. It's just very interesting because it's a halach and Shulchan Aruch. You're going to ask me, you're going to look at me, how could you tell me this halach and Shulchan Aruch? In Simon Tav Kuf Pei in Orach Chaim, it talks about different days that we fast. One of them is B'chav Vav Nisan Yeshua ben Nun was nifter. That's a Yom Tainus, and it says on the 5th day of Shvat, this Canaan that were after Yeshua, they died. Mamela, that day is also seen as a Yom Tzara, because after that it gave the Yechilas for the Goyim to start bothering Klal Yisrael again. Okay. It's not a it's the Din Shulchan Aruch. And the pasuk continues. The pasuk says, "Kasher, Hayiti and Moshe, Aהיה. The same way I was with Moshe, I'll be with you." It's Mavur and Chazal that there were many things that Yeshua had, that Yeshua was zeicher to, because he was Mishamish Moshe Rabbeinu, as we spoke previous year. but there are many ways that he was very similar to Moshe Rabbeinu. Mechilta state, and elsewhere it says that Moshe was shokol keneged Kol Yisrael, so too Yeshua was shokol keneged Kol Yisrael. And we know that it says lechem abirim ochal ish, that there was one person that had mun, that the mun fell for him keneged Kol Yisrael. Who was that? That was Yeshua ben Nun. And Medrash says, also in the Mechilta, it says, Leinitna HaTorah elo leich le'amon. There was no person that was greater in Torah than Yeshua ben Nun, so he got the man keneged Kol Yisrael. And we explained earlier that every Yid in Klal Yisrael has Dalet Amos and Eretz Yisrael. That's also b'schus this. By Moshe Rabbeinu, it says, Vayiru migeshes Elav, they were afraid to approach him because of his kedusha, his radiance. And in Yeshua, it says later on in Perek Dalet, Vayiru, I say, Kasher is Moshe, they were afraid of him the same way they were afraid of Moshe. Now here's where things start to get a little bit interesting. Shteit in Yalkut Shemaini over here, Ainli Ela Misas Moshe, that Mipi HaKadosh Baruch Hu Sheyeh Misas Neshika. It says by Moshe Rabbeinu that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him that he's going to have a Misas Neshika. Minayin Af Misas Yeshua. How do you know that even the Misa of Yeshua is also going to be a Misas Neshika? Shenemar Kasher Hayisi Moshe Eyyeh. The same way I was with Moshe, I'm going to be with you. The same way it says that Moshe died over there, Moshe the Eved Hashem died over there, it says by Yeshua also, Vayamas Yeshua ben Nun Eved Hashem. It says Yeshua ben Nun Eved Hashem also. That he was also Zeicha to die with a Misas Neshika. L'chayr is makam to be Ma'ir, that's before in Chazal, that really Yeshua was supposed to live 120 years just like Moshe Rabbeinu. And he didn't. Why? So we'll see why later, but there's a few reasons that are brought in Chazal. I want to talk about that in a little bit. But it was an einish for one of maybe two things, maybe more things that he did over the time. So the zayach is like this: that even though Yeshua got an einish that was in the Skatru Yamav, he still was zeichet to a Misas Neshika just like Moshe Rabbeinu. And there's a Yerushalmi that says that the pasuk says in Perek Aleph, Kasher tiva Hashem es Moshe Avdoi. That just like I was Mitzvah Moshe, my servant, so too Moshe was Mitzvah Yeshua, and so too Yeshua did Mikol Asher Tiva Hashem es Moshe. It doesn't say Mikol Asher Tiva Oisoi Moshe. It says Mikol Asher Tiva Hashem es Moshe. Meaning even certain things that he didn't hear directly, Afilu Dvarim Shloi Shama Mipi Moshe. It was his schema daitai. It was as if he was hearing it from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, meaning even though he didn't hear it directly from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but because he was a Talmud of Moshe Rabbeinu, he knew exactly how to do it. And Rashi says in the end of Sefer Dvarim that Kolzman that Yeshua was alive was as if Moshe Rabbeinu was alive. We explained that before. But the pasuk says also, Navi mikirbacha me'achacha kamayni yakim lecha Hashem alikacha elav tishmon. That a Navi from mikirbacha, from us, from our brothers, kamayni yakim lecha Hashem alikacha. Rabbi Mechai says that that's referring to Yeshua. It says they love Tishmon, and the pasuk says by Yeshua v'tishmu b'kayli l'chol asher tzivizi eschem, and they listen to Yeshua just like they listen to Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, another just interesting thing is that it says in these psukim at the beginning of Sefer Yeshua, it says 3 times Chazak ve'amatz. And state in the Svarim that Chazak 3 times is Gematria Moshe. And each one of these times that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him Chazak ve'amatz, he was putting in more Moshe Rabbeinu into Yeshua. And until by the 3rd time he had 3 madregas, 3 marochas, 3 madregas of Moshe Rabbeinu within him, kidei to be loichem and to be manig, klal yisrael v'yistarvus to sign. It's just interesting because when we finish a parsha, we say chazak, chazak, v'nis chazek. But there are other minhagim that they say chazak, chazak, chazak. The pshat that is the same thing that we're saying over here. We're trying to be mechazik, not just be mechazik, but we're trying to be ma'ira this koyach of Moshe Rabbeinu within ourselves to be able to be mamshech, to learn Torah of his darf to sein. Okay, fine. Weiter. Kasher Yisi Moshe Eyyeh steht in der Yalkut. Shonu Rabbi Seinu hat gelernt, Matzilen tik HaSefer Sefer mit Pnei Adleika. On Shabbos, you're allowed, if there's a fire chas v'shalom, you're allowed to save the mantle of the Sefer Torah together with the Sefer Torah. Why? Hoil v'zachu lidabek b'svarim. Hoil v'zachu lidabek b'svarim. Even though it itself doesn't have a chashivas, but because it's used to cloak the Sefer Torah, Mela has its own chashivas to be able to be saved from the fire. Omer HaKosov, the pasuk says, "Holiches chachamim yachkam." Those that walk with the chachamim get smarter. V'raya ksilim yoraya, and a person who spends time with ksilim gets worse. Kol mi shemadbek atzmei l'tzadik zeich aliyos k'moisei. Anybody who attaches himself to a tzaddik is zeicha to become like him. Now, it's more by osmosis than trying to copy him. Obviously, if you're trying to copy somebody, it's gonish. That's reg silim yaroya, for sure. At the Maitze Beloit, we find by light, Alidesha Yadavuk Ba'avram, we find that light was very connected to Avram Avinu. The pasuk says, Avram kaved ma'id b'mikneh b'ketzefu b'zahav. Avram was very heavy laden with mikneh, with silver and gold. And by light it says, Ubelait ksiv v'gam l'light ha'hoilech es Avram ha'yotzaynu b'akav ha'yolim. So that's ha'hoilech es chacham yachkam. He followed along with Avram, and he was Eichet, the Tzayin Bakar and Ayelim. He picked up how to be Noyeg with the Tzayin Bakar and the Ayelim because he was with Avram Avinu. Then Light was an interesting fellow because he ended up in Sodom. And then he went and he attached himself, he connected himself to the Sodomites. Shenemar v'yisa Light is Einav, Light lifted up his eyes, and that's V'roya Ksilim Yaroya, and then he became the Roya in the evil city of Sodom. And he had this most madna ma'aser with his daughters, that his grandchildren are his children, and a whole confusing thing which Amin and Mayav come out that make problems for Klal Yisrael. But I think that the pshat is it's licked in the Vayisa Leitas Einav. Says by Avram Avinu, says that before the bris was Avram, and then after when the hay was Maisif in his name, so it turned into Ramach, that he was Shailat and all Ramach Evarim. And what were the 5 Evarim? Was his Einaim and his Aznaim and his Reish Agviyah were completely under his Shlita, his eyes and his ears and his Reish Agviyah. So the point that it says in the Ran and in Durham over there, that if Avram Avinu saw something, it was for Avodas Hashem. I mean, he didn't see it unless it was 100% for Avodas Hashem. You know, it's hard to talk about Avram Avinu, but Reb Daniel Mavshevitz, who was a Talmud from Kelm, said that the Alter of Kelm didn't blink his eye unless it was doing unless he did it with a complete cheshbon and nefesh. Alter of Kelm was not so long ago. Avram Avinu was a davar pasha to say. The Baracha, the Medrash continues, Holiches Chachamim ze Yeshua shenidbak l'Moshe. The Holiches Chachamim, the person who walked with the Chachamim, is Yeshua, that he attached himself to Moshe. Shenemar Yeshua benun malei ruach chachma, ki Moshe samach es yadav alav. Moshe was samach yadav alav. That would be the Mashiach, so to speak, the smicha. Umar ksiv kasher yisi Moshe Ehyeh imach, because he was able to v'shaisa batzamas devarav shal Moshe all the years, and now he's able to be mamshech the hanhag of Klal Yisrael. Now, we mentioned in the Medrash that the mantle of a Sefer Torah gets to be saved on Shabbos, even though it doesn't have any kedusha of its own. But because it was attached and it cloaked davar shabbat kedusha, so the status changes into a chayfetz of kedusha. So even more so, a person that's connected to the kedusha is mailam b'kodesh. Something is chayim, it's much more shaykh to kedusha than something that's not. Such a thing as a lebedig Sefer Torah. We always say that the Mishnah says that in the Vuktin, the Braisa, that Osar HaKadosh Baruch Hu lahanchil l'chol tzadik v'tzadik shlosh meis asar olamas. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be manchil in Olam Habot every l'chol tzadik v'tzadik, 310 olamas. What's l'chol tzadik v'tzadik? What's every single tzadik? What's the v'tzadik? But these people, these tzaddikim that we're talking about over here, are not the people that were tzaddikim b'chayayim davka, but they had a shaykhis, they were davak and tzaddikim in their lifetime. And state in Svarim that when a neshama of a tzaddik goes to Gan Eden, he goes through Gehenim, and when he goes through Gehenim, he's able to pull Gevissa people out. And one of the people that he pulls out is the person that's Dovuk and Tzadikim Bechayav, and he takes him for a ride and schleps him with him to Gan Eden. So that's a pshat in Kol Tzadik V'Tzadik. Okay, that's number one. Number two, the kalim, the objects and the items that a tzaddik uses, get a hashpah from the Kedushas HaTzadik. We find this, Mesilas Yesharim says this by Yaakov Avinu, that he took the Evan, Asher Samer Rash Esav, that has a shaykh that the Teva should be so machnia, so to speak, to the tzaddik, because he says that when a tzaddik is oila, the oilam is nasali imay, the whole Teva is meshubah to the tzaddik, and Mela Yaakov Avinu needed something, the Teva had to respond, the Teva was forced to respond. There's some cipher that says interesting things, just a few interesting ideas. Some cipher says in Parshas Toldos that the clothing of a person get affected by the kedusha of the person, and the same is true the other way around. That if a person does averos and wears clothing, it's mashpia the other way as well. These stories of rabbis that they were able to smell. They walked by a house, they were able to smell of Gan Eden, and there was there was an interesting story. It was of a galach. I think the story of the Rechaim, whatever it was. But the point is that they're not getting carried away with the stories. But the point is that there's a kedusha that a person infuses into his begadim, probably without him realizing it. But where does this come from? So this Yerushalmi Moed Katan, some Sefer brings that they had a question in the Bis Medrash and they weren't able to answer it until a person came and he gave a teretz. So the Chacham asked him, "Who are you and what kind of kayach do you have to give such a teretz?" So he says like this. I'm just telling you. I'm not making this up. It's Yerushalmi Moed Katan and Elam Agalchan. Take a look yourself. He says, "Makle shel Reb Meir haisa biyadi." I was holding the walking stick of Reb Meir, v'hi haisa milamadat das, and the fact that I was holding on to the stick of Reb Meir, that taught me Torah. It doesn't mean that as soon as he would touch the answer of Reb Meir, all of a sudden the teretz popped out, but it means that he was dovuk and the kedusha that Reb Meir was mashpia into this makel gave this person a koyach to hold on to this kedusha that he had siyata d'shmaya, that he was able to answer this question that the other chachamim weren't able to. And we find this in Tanakh. We find by Elisha that he sent Gehazi to put his stick on the nar to be mashpia to mechaya him, and we know that Gehazi wasn't the best shliach, as the Gemara says, and as we'll see Mitzvah Shem in the Sefer Malachim. Just one more nakud over here. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, that Tzadi Hamed Beis says that Avishai ben Tzruya, Yoav ben Tzruya's brother, knew that there was something going on with David HaMelech. It was when he was fighting with one of the giants, one of Goliath's brothers, and he was in a big sakana, and he didn't know where David HaMelech was. He didn't know how to reach him. He didn't have a cell phone on him. So he asked the Chachamim if it's mutter for him to take David HaMelech's horse, to ride on it, to be able to find him. So the question is, what does he need to get David HaMelech's horse? I don't know. Hire a taxi, call Hatzalah, call the police. Why do you need David HaMelech's horse for? But the Ben Yehoyada explains over there that the pshat is that the horse that David HaMelech used to ride on had a certain kedusha from David HaMelech, and would be able to connect him to David HaMelech much faster. And as you know from the Gemara over there, that the emes he had kvitzas haderach, and was able to find David, and was able to save him from that Givisa Tzara. Okay, fine. Now let's get back to the medrash that we mentioned earlier, of the fact that Yeshua ben Nun didn't live as long as he should have. What does this mean? So it's a medrash in Bamidbar Rabbah Chav Beis Hey Amar Rabbi Seinu. Rabbi Seinu said, "Ksiv b'Yeshua kasher yisi Moshe Ehyeh imach." The same way I was with Moshe, I will be with you. Vayitzarich Yeshua lichas kuf chav shana k'may Moshe Rabbeinu. Yeshua was supposed to live 120 years just like Moshe Rabbeinu. Malam and Eskatru Shnaisav Eser Shanim. Why did he lose 10 years of his life? By Moshe Rabbeinu, it says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him that you're going to fight the war of Klal Yisrael against the Midyan, and as soon as you finish fighting that war, you're going to die. So even though he knew he was going to die, he went with the same zrizos as if he would have been doing any other mitzvah. And Yeshua knew that as soon as he would finish fighting off all the kings in Eretz Yisrael, it would be the same thing. But Yeshua came when Yeshua went to fight with the 31 kings, Amar Amani Hargam Miyad, and he makes. He says, as soon as I kill them, I'm going to die. Kshem Sha'asa Moshe Rabbeinu. the same way that happened by Moshe Rabbeinu. Ma'asa, so what did he do? He slowed down the process. He wasn't in such a rush anymore. Pasuk says that he spent a lot of time fighting. He could have knocked him out much quicker, but he spent a lot of time on it. Today that he shouldn't have to die. So Amalek Kadosh Baruch Hu v'kacha sisa hareini mekatzer shnei secha. Is this what you do? I'm going to be mekatzer your years eser shanim. So Omar Shlomo, that's what Shlomo says. Rabbis machshavos blavish ratzas Hashem yisokum. There are many ideas that a person can have, but ultimately Hashem's plan has to get fulfilled. Just it's very interesting that the Gemara says in Sukkah that there was a city where people wouldn't die, and so people tried to get into that city when they knew it was their time. But the Gemara says that the Malach HaMavis brought them, caught them, and they were right as they were about to get into the city. The Malach HaMavis caught them there and chapped them. So that's Rabbis Machshavos Lavish. You can't outsmart HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, emes is why would it be a time on Yeshua that he should get punished? That the war was taking a long time. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him, you're not going to be able to finish them off quickly. But the Ramban says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mitzaveh him to do it as fast as he can and to kill out all of them. And if he can't kill out all of them, try to kill out as much as he can. Just do what you can in this amount. I don't know if he gave him a time frame, but he told him to do this amount of time. But Lamaisa Yeshua held off, and it ended up causing him to be nanash. So Rebbe Lapian explains that Yeshua saw b'nevuah Baruch HaKodesh that after he dies and after the Zkanim pass away, as we mentioned earlier, that Klal Yisrael is going to start being chayte. And that's the truth, like it says. Vayavod Yisrael es Hashem kol yimei Yeshua v'chol yimei hazkenim asher yarichu yom acher Yeshua. That the Klal Yisrael were Oved Hashem all the days of Yeshua and all the days of the Zkanim that were after Yeshua. And it says, Yamim harichu shanim leharichu. Why? They weren't marich shanim because they stopped being Oved Hashem after he died. So he pushed off the Milchama of the 31 kings that he should live longer. Because Kolzman, he's alive, Klal Yisrael is not going to be chayte. But then it's weiter, the Pshat, why the measure earlier ends off, Rabbis Machshavos Blavish Ratzas Hashem Yisakum. The same way we find by the Gemara Brachas on Daf Yud with Chizkiyahu and Yeshaya tells him, he tells him, it's true, maybe Klal Yisrael is going to be chayte. Maybe you'll have a son Menashe, but right now you got to do your mitzvah, what your mitzvah to do. Now we find by Yiteyצב also that he lived 110 years, that he was supposed to live longer also, and it says that the Malchus, the Rebbeinu, the Adnus, being in power, is Mekatz Yama v'Shaytzav Shel Adam, like the Gemara says in Soiten, the Gemara says in Brachas, and it's just interesting that they both, Yeshua and Yosef, both lived 110 years. You know that Yeshua is from Shevet Yosef, that we know. It says Shanim. It said they lived Me'av Eser Shanim, even though the diktuk would be Me'av Eser Shana. But l'chayra, the pshat in that is because they didn't live the shleimus that they should have lived. The Tanachum and Parshas Tetzaveh says another reason why Yeshua didn't live the full 120 years that he should have, because it was Meira Halacha b'fnei Rabbi. There were 10 things that Yeshua said that he shouldn't have. It says, Vayan Yeshua benun Masharas Moshe mibachura Vayomer Adoni Moshe Keloim Lefikach Zak the Medrash Pichsu Le'eser Shana. Therefore, he lost 10 years of his life. From here you learn, She'ein Talmud Rash Loimer Davar Lefnei Rabbi. A Talmud is not allowed to speak up in front of his Rebbe. She'kol HaMeira Davar Lefnei Rabbi. Anybody who speaks up in front of his Rebbe, that's Meira Halacha. There are halachas of how a person has to act in front of his Rebbe, if a person just doesn't get it on his own, right? But one of the halachas is that Mokum of the Rebbe, if your Rebbe's in this town, you're not allowed to pass on shilas in this town, you have to pass on shilas. If you want to pass on shilas, you have to go out of town. And even then, it could only be done with Rishus of the Rebbe. But it's just interesting that we find this by Nadav and Avihu, that's one of the reasons why they died. It's because they were Meir Halacha in front of Moshe Rabbeinu. So Vai says it's very chomer. And we find by Shmuel also that Eli was asking if was telling the Kayin that he should shecht, that Yisrael shouldn't shecht. So Shmuel was 2-3 years old. He told him no, Azar's allowed to shecht also. So Eli wanted to do away with him because he was Meir Halacha b'fnei Rabbi. All right, so this is hopefully one day we'll get to discuss this concept of being Meir Halacha Fnei Rabbi as well. And just two more quick zaken before we close up the shop for today. Ki ata tanchil es ha'om hazeh. The Yalkut says, Ki hu yaver lefnei ha'om hazeh, vim hu arver lefneihem arvin. If he's lefnei ha'om, then they go. Vim lav ein neichlin. But if he doesn't go in front of them, then he's not manchil them. V'chein at ha'mayzik shaholchu lasses mulchama ba'ai. The second city that they went to fight against was a city called Ayin Yud. Navlu mehem kalamid vav tzadikim. They lost like 36 tzadikim in the war. Shenemar vayaku mehem anshe ha'am keshleisha meshisha ish. Like 36 people. Vayomer Hashem leYeshua, Hashem said to Yeshua, Kum lech. Get up and go. Lama zata nefel al panecha. Why is it that you fall on your face? Loikach amarti leMoshe Rabbach. Isn't this what I told Moshe, your Rebbe? Im arver lefneihem oivrim, v'em lav einam oivrim. If you go in front of them, they're going to go over. Meaning they'll get into Eretz Yisrael. If you don't go in front of them, you're not going to go over. Im manchilim neichlim. If you're the one that's manchil, then they'll be neichel. Meaning if you're the one that's giving out the pieces of land, then you'll be manchil them. V'em lav ein neichlim. V'atu shalachtem v'lachta achreim. Then the reason why this person got lost is because you weren't fighting with your ganze in front of Klal Yisrael. What does this mean that he was in front or in the back? Does it really matter if he travels in front or travels in the back? What's the pshat? But the pshat is that, again, we said Yiteyצב לפניך, that the pshat is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is being maftiach Yeshua, that there's no makom for chalisha sadas. And a real manik is a person, he has to think about what he does, and he has to think everything through even more than a regular person does, because because of his great responsibilities that he has. But it shouldn't be that what other people say should have any impact on what he does, because he has to do exactly what HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him to do. And that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Yeshua. Yiteyצב, anybody, לפניך, l'haris leches haderech. Nobody's allowed to tell you what to do. You have to stand strong in front of Klal Yisrael. לפניך. לפניך means you have to be the face of Klal Yisrael. You have to show everybody what you got to do, right? It's by the Melech. It says that he has to have a sefer Torah kara by kol yemei chayacha. L'chari k'shtal to this kol yemei chayacha. That kol yemei chayacha. It's only if you're listening to the Torah and shtaling to every halacha and Shulchan Aruch that you'll be able to. That you'll, if you're kara by kol yemei chayacha, then you'll have Yiteyצב לפניך kol yemei chayacha. And that's כאשר הייתי Moshe, אהיה, to follow every halacha, to have the koyach to fight. It takes a lot of koyches to be the leader. You have to be there, be available all day, all night for everyone, big and small, be busy with every single problem, important, not important. Aarpech a'A'azveka. The Goyen explains that he was maftiach two haftachas over here. Aarpech is a haftach that you'll win the war, and A'Azveka is that after the war, until you have to give out all the nachla in Eretz Yisrael, like the pasuk says, Ki ata tavi es ha'om hazeh v'ata tanchil. Now we know that there's a certain fatigue that can overcome a person, even a groisa mensch, even a groisa leader, but especially in a time of war. But this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is maftiach Yeshua, that he doesn't need to be afraid about that. And like we said in the Sifri, that he doesn't have to be afraid of Amalek. That's le'arbecha. This is from the Chidah. The Chidah says this. It's not so clear in the Chidah, but this is what my understanding of the Chidah was. That le'arbecha is like we find by Melchemes Amalek, that it was vayisum erfidim sherafu yedayim and HaTorah. So le'arbecha means that it'll give you the koyach that you'll be able to hold on to the Torah via starv to zayin. Aa'zveka and tazveini yom yamayim azveka. Because if you leave the Torah for one day, you're gonna lose even more. And that's why we know there's the takana of Kriyas Torah on Mondays and Thursdays, and on Shabbos, because they have to learn Torah just on Shabbos. That means you're going a whole week from Shabbos to Shabbos. That shaykh that a person doesn't learn. But if you also learn on Monday, and then 3 days later you learn on Thursday, and then you also learn on Shabbos, then you're attaching yourself to the Torah 3 times a week. This goes back to what we were saying before about chazak, 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 the 3 times chazak, which is Keneged Moshe, that the whole Torah was given to us by Moshe Rabbeinu. That the point is that we shouldn't give any makom for the Yetzer Hara to make any rifyun. And we find later that the Malach came to with Tainus and Yeshua that it was Mevatel Torah b'hemshach l'Milchamas. Now, if you're Mevatel Torah b'hemshach l'Milchamas, what happens is that you're Mevatel l'Milchama. This is why he needed to be extra careful with this. Shkoyach, sei gesund.